Okay, the Library of Alexandria. We've all heard the name, right? This legendary beacon of knowledge, the intellectual heart of the ancient world. And we all think we know how the story ends. A single, giant, catastrophic fire. But what if I told you the real story is so much more complicated, and honestly, way more fascinating? The story we've all been sold, this idea of one tragic fire wiping out all of antiquity's wisdom in one terrible night, it's a powerful story. But is it the truth? The whole truth? Not even close. Yeah, that whole idea of a single, world-altering fire is more of a myth than actual history. The truth is a far more insidious and kind of haunting tale. See, the library didn't have a sudden, dramatic death. It bled out. Over centuries. It was a victim of politics, neglect, religious fanaticism, war. It was this slow, tragic unraveling. And to understand how it fell, you first have to understand the sheer, mind-blowing ambition of what it was. So let's go back. It all starts with this unbelievably audacious dream back in the 3rd century BCE with the Ptolemaic dynasty in Egypt. The vision wasn't just to build a library. It was to collect all human knowledge. Everything. All under one roof. And this was part of an even bigger, truly revolutionary idea. The library was really the beating heart of this much bigger complex called the Museum, which means House of the Muses. Now, this wasn't just a place to stash scrolls. Think of it as the ancient world's first real think tank, a research university where the greatest minds were given salaries, housing, even tax exemptions just to think, to research, to debate, and to create. And they were obsessed with collecting everything. I mean, their methods were intense. They sent agents all over the known world with huge budgets to buy up scrolls. But their most famous policy? This is wild. Any ship that docked in Alexandria's harbor had its books, all of them, seized. Official scribes would then meticulously copy them, hand the copy back to the owner, and keep the precious original for the library. Can you even imagine that happening today? So you get all these texts and all these brilliant minds in one place, and what happens? It becomes an engine of innovation. This wasn't some dusty archive. It was a place that was actively pushing the boundaries of human understanding for centuries. Take the very first head librarian, a guy named Zenodotus. He did something we completely take for granted. He organized scrolls by the first letter of the author's name. It's one of the first known uses of alphabetical order to organize anything. He wasn't just storing knowledge. He was inventing how to access it. Then his successor, Callimachus, took it to a whole other level. He created something called the Ptolemaics. It was a massive 120-volume work that cataloged everything in the library by author and genre. Before this, finding a specific scroll would have been a complete nightmare. This was, for all intents and purposes, the world's first library catalog. He was basically inventing information science. And then there was the third librarian, Eratosthenes. And this is where it gets just astounding. He used the resources and knowledge there to achieve something incredible. By measuring the angle of a shadow in Alexandria, at the exact same time there was no shadow in a city further south, he calculated the circumference of the entire planet. His calculation? It was ridiculously accurate. With a stick and a shadow. That's it. And it wasn't just theory. A scholar named Hero of Alexandria, working right there in this intellectual hotbed, created a device called an Heliopole. It was a simple metal sphere that spun around using jets of steam. It was the world's first recorded steam engine, almost 2,000 years before the Industrial Revolution. Mind-blowing. So at its absolute peak, the library held an estimated 400,000 papyrus scrolls. Now, to be clear, that's not 400,000 books like we think of them. A single work like Homer's Iliad could take up dozens of scrolls. Still, the sheer volume of information gathered in one place was unlike anything the world had ever seen. So if this place was so unbelievably important, what on earth happened to it? Well, this brings us to the most famous story of all, the one starring Julius Caesar and a giant, all-consuming fire. All right, let's just bust this myth right now. The story goes that Caesar burned the whole thing to the ground in 48 BC. The reality is a lot more nuanced. Look, during his civil war, Caesar did set fire to enemy ships in the harbor. That fire absolutely spread to some warehouses near the docks where, yes, scrolls were likely stored. And a part of the collection, maybe 10%, was lost. A horrible loss for sure, but it was not the fatal blow.
The main library, the Mausoleum itself, survived. We know this because famous scholars were still working there for centuries afterward.
So if Caesar's fire didn't deliver the killing blow, what did? The real answer, as we said, is a slow, agonizing process, a death by 1,000 cuts spread out over hundreds of years. This timeline here really shows the long, drawn-out tragedy. It started way before Caesar, back in 45 BC, when a paranoid king kicked out all the foreign intellectuals, causing a massive brain drain. Then, you have Caesar's fire, which damaged a chunk of the collection. After that, under Roman rule, the library just wasn't a priority anymore. Funding dried up, and its prestige started to fade. Then came the big physical blows. In 272 AD, a Roman emperor's army completely destroyed the royal quarter of the city, which is exactly where the main library was located. And finally, in 391 AD, the daughter library, a huge secondary collection housed in a temple called the Serapeum, was demolished by a Christian mob, purging pagan sites. It was just this cascade of failures, not one single event.
So the library is gone. The physical buildings, the scrolls, all of it. But its story, the very idea of it, leaves us with this powerful legacy and some really unsettling lessons.
What truly destroyed the Library of Alexandria wasn't just fire and armies. It was a combination of much more insidious forces. It was the fear of knowledge that doesn't fit with your own beliefs. It was political instability that starves vital institutions of their funding. And it was the arrogant, dangerous belief that the past has nothing left to teach us. And that makes you ask a pretty tough question, doesn't it? In our own age of misinformation, censorship, and raging debates over history, are these exact same destructive forces still at play? But the story doesn't end in total darkness. The power of that original idea was just too strong to die forever. In 2002, right near the site of the ancient original, the Bibliotheca Alexandriana opened its doors. It's this stunning, modern library and cultural center built as a direct tribute to that old, audacious dream of universal knowledge. It's a symbol of resilience, a symbol of renewal.
Today, we have more information at our fingertips than the Ptolemies could have ever possibly dreamed of. We have the Library of Alexandria in our pockets. But the story of what happened to the original is this timeless, crucial warning. It leaves us with one final, haunting question. Knowledge is more accessible now than at any point in human history, but is it any less fragile?